When people talk about Jurassic Park, the conversation usually starts with the T-Rex, the roar, the iconic entrance, the king of the dinosaur. But what if I told you the most terrifying predator in the entire franchise isn't the one with the biggest teeth? No, the real nightmare. The one that haunted our childhoods, moved in silence, worked in packs, and hunted with strategy rather than brute force. Velociraptors. They weren't just fast, they were smart, calculated, cold. Again and again, these creatures evolved right before our eyes. From shadowy figures in the trees to soldiers of genetic warfare. From mindless killers to something dangerously close to human allies. But after all they've become, here's the real question. Are they still dinosaurs? Or have we turned them into something else entirely? Time to find out. The first raptors we came to know, and the ones that branded themselves into our memory as the embodiment of fear, were the ones from the original movie. Right in the opening scene, when a worker is dragged into the container, it becomes immediately clear what those creatures were capable of. Not even several tasers used at once were enough to make them release the man. These raptors were the original models, developed on Isla Sorna and later transported to Isla Nublar as the true stars of the park, becoming, ironically, the first sign that the project was doomed to fail. Their look was simpler and more organic, earth-toned skin, green eyes, and an unpredictable behavior that made it obvious they weren't animals to be underestimated. In this case, less was more. Their dark simplicity made them even more terrifying. But the real threat came from their leader, the matriarch known as the Big One. She wasn't exactly larger or stronger than the others, but her ferocity was unmatched. Clever, coordinated, and absolutely lethal, these raptors didn't hunt out of hunger, but out of pure instinct. They spent the entire movie chasing the humans with incredible determination, tearing down reinforced fences and almost turning everything into a complete disaster until the Rex suddenly showed up to turn the tide and save the protagonists. The iconic kitchen scene with Lex and Tim became a hallmark of suspense cinema, proving that not even an enclosed space offered safety from these creatures. On Isla Sorna, the true dinosaur factory of the Jurassic universe, the Velociraptors of Sorna evolved alongside the untamed wilderness. They were no longer caged predators. They were the rulers of a living, thriving ecosystem. When we see them again in the Lost World, they had become something far more terrifying. Natural apex hunters that coordinated their attacks like prehistoric wolves. Visually, they were different. Leaner bodies, striking stripes, designed not for display, but for survival. These patterns weren't decorative. They were camouflage. Their intelligence had been sharpened by life in the wild. They learned to use tall vegetation to their advantage, just like when they wiped out the entire heavily armed hunter team, eliminating them one by one in the iconic tall grass scene. The Raptors strike from all directions, coordinated and efficient. The scene where Ian Malcolm is cornered in the shed is a perfect example of their almost sadistic behavior. They didn't always attack immediately. They provoked, tested, and psychologically broke their prey. At one point, we see two females disrupting their own formation, distracting each other in a fierce fight, giving Sarah Harding just the opening she needed to escape. That unpredictability was part of what made them so dangerous. But if there's one group of raptors that pushed the idea of predatory intelligence even further, it's the pack living in the southern region of Isla Sorna. Some predators intimidate because of their size, others because of their silence. By the time we arrive at Jurassic Park III, the Velociraptors have entered an entirely new phase. Not only has their appearance changed, but their way of thinking as well. They weren't just hunters. They were tactical, patient, and psychologically terrifying and cunning. The visual changes are striking. This new species sports a slimmer, more agile body, defined crests, longer snouts, and for the first time, a clear distinction between males and females. The males had blue and red feathers on their heads, forming striking crests, while the females displayed a grayer coloration with dark markings that helped them blend into the dense vegetation of the tropical forest. And among them, one stands out. Fans call him Quill, the alpha male. Quill redefines what it means to be a predator. He is calm, patient, methodical. He waited hidden behind an industrial pipe for an unknown amount of time. What happens next is an act of strategic cruelty. The Raptors don't attack right away. Instead, Quill impales a member of the team with precision, not to kill, but to disable. His motionless body becomes bait, a trap, a message. It's one of the most brutal and brilliant displays of strategy in the entire franchise. They used the man himself as living bait, and at the end of the film, it's shown that they weren't driven by pure bloodlust. And perhaps the most revealing moment comes at the very end. After the chaos, loss, and confrontation, the survivors return the Raptors' stolen eggs. Seeing that their eggs were returned unharmed, the alpha female chooses to spare the humans, and that was an act of reason, not mercy, and that makes them something entirely different. When Jurassic World opened its gates, it introduced more than just a new park. It unveiled a completely different kind of velociraptor. Not wild, not feral, but programmed, trained. They were called Charlie, Delta, Echo, and then there was Blue. Genetically refined, physically enhanced, and raised under constant supervision, these raptors weren't bred to survive in the wild. They were engineered to obey, to serve. Strikingly muscular, faster than any variant before. Their colors were distinct, their patterns intentional. They were weapons, disguised as attractions. But what truly set them apart wasn't their agility or strength. It was their bond with their trainer, Owen Grady. These were creatures meant to follow commands, and for a time, they did. But when faced with something even more engineered, the Indominus Rex, everything cracked. At first, the Raptors submitted. Recognizing the genetic superiority of the Indominus, they joined her. It was hierarchy, code, biology. Then, Blue made a choice. In a turning point the franchise had never seen, Blue turned against the hybrid, against instinct. And for Owen, her loyalty wasn't commanded. It was earned. Her sisters, Delta and Echo, died protecting him. Charlie was taken out mid-charge. Moments that hurt more than they should, because by then they weren't just dinosaurs. They were characters. And Blue, she survived. She stood alongside the T-Rex, not as prey or enemy, but as ally. The last of her squad, the product of science, and something deeper, something dangerously close to love. Some raptors were created in laboratories, others were trained in parks, but the ones shown in Jurassic Camp tell a much darker story. These weren't born free, not even in captivity. They were created for one purpose: combat. Inside a secret Manta Corp facility, the raptors were turned into entertainment weapons, manipulated by neural chips, and forced into brutal high-tech arena battles for the sadistic pleasure of their handlers. They had no choice, no control. But the most terrifying part? Even enslaved, their intelligence never left them. They adapted, they watched, they waited. In one of the series' most satisfying twists, the Raptors fake submission. Their movements are slow, robotic, exactly as they were programmed. Until the moment arrives. Suddenly the act drops, a precise shove, a calculated strike. The most impactful and gratifying scene involving these raptors happens when they finally break free and turn on Cash, one of the most arrogant and cruel humans in the story. Instead of attacking him right away, they set up a flawless psychological trap. They pretend to still be under the chip's control, approaching him stiffly and cautiously, until, at the decisive moment, they reveal the truth. One knocks Cash down with a calculated blow, while the other finishes the revenge, dragging him to the death he fully deserved. These raptors were smarter than their creators. Jurassic World. Rebirth brought hope that the Raptors would return to their original form. Dangerous, dominant, thrilling. The promotional material announced the return of the classic Jurassic Park III design, reigniting fans' excitement. The crests were back, the sharper eyes, the slim bird-like bodies, but on screen, what we saw wasn't the return we expected. These raptors were shadows of what they once were. No strategy, no fear factor. Their entire aura was gone. They were cautious, even clumsy, more prey than predators. In one scene, a new genetically modified dinosaur, the Mutodon, ambushes and kills a raptor almost instantly. No resistance, no cunning, just death. The mystery, the danger, the raw tension that once defined these creatures had vanished. And it wasn't just disappointing. It felt wrong, because these weren't the raptors we feared since childhood. They weren't the big one, they weren't Quill, and they definitely weren't Blue anymore. Years of fear and respect unraveled in minutes. It wasn't just a drop in presentation. It was a fall from legend to oblivion. And for fans who remember what a raptor could be, it hurt more than any on-screen death ever could. But just when it seemed like the legacy was lost, something unexpected emerged. Beta, Blue's daughter, her clone, her continuation. Smaller, sleeker, sharper, Beta carried her mother's iconic markings but moved with a new kind of energy. She wasn't born in a lab or raised behind glass. She was born in the wild, taught not by scientists, but by Blue herself, and that made her different. She lacked the aggression of earlier raptors, but you could see it in her eyes. Alert, calculating, adaptive. She wasn't bred to fight. She was bred to survive, to watch, to learn. For the first time across the entire franchise, we saw something unique, a parenting raptor. Blue didn't just protect Beta, she cared for her. communicated with her, nurtured her. That relationship wasn't just emotional, it was primal, a real instinctual bond forged by evolution, not by programming. When Beta was taken, Blue didn't go on a killing rampage. She tracked, she waited. And when they were finally reunited, there was no violence, just presence, recognition, trust. Beta represents more than the next generation. She represents the first real possibility that raptors could coexist with humans, not as threats, not as weapons, but as something entirely new, not monsters, not machines, living, thinking beings, with roots in the past and a future we haven't yet defined. From the cold precision of the big one, to the cunning strategy of Quill, to the loyalty of Blue, and the quiet promise of Beta, Velociraptors have never just been monsters. They've been mirrors, reflecting our need to dominate, our fear of intelligence, our search for connection. Over time, they've evolved from shadows in the jungle to characters we care about, not because they're less dangerous, but because they became something more. So now I'll ask you, which raptor left the biggest mark on you? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, deep dives, extinction legends, prehistoric beasts, hit like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next chapter of Primalis.